How's it going, everyone? It's Adrian from Pink Pirates TCG here, and we're back with another video. So I hope you guys had a great pre-release. Personally, for me, it was super fun. But now we gotta prepare for the actual release date of OP2 coming out at March 10th, right? So we're gonna go over pretty much every deck or every meta deck that we're gonna see in OP2, and I'm gonna kind of work backwards so we could get the newest decks out of the way. Today's gonna be about Smoker. The next one's gonna be about Ivankov, and then we'll get to Kinemon and Zoro eventually. But I wanted to do those last just because there's just like small updates and playstyle updates that you have to do for those two decks. But today we're gonna be talking about Smoker, what makes the deck strong, some weaknesses, and of course go into a deck profile. So let's start off with what the leader skill even does. So for those of you that don't know, Black's whole gimmick is that they can subtract cost from their opponent's character's cards. And this is really significant because all of their cards kind of divide up into two camps of effects. One of them is KO effects, and that's pretty simple to understand, right? They basically say, KO a 3 cost or like KO a 1 cost, but then you could manipulate your opponent's character's cards to where like they will cost 3 costs. So if there's a 5 drop on the board, you could reduce its cost by 2 with like an on-play card like Helmeppo, and then knock it out with like Kobe or something because it's technically 3 costs. And then the other set of effects is cards that get some sort of extra effect if your opponent has a character that costs 0. And you're gonna see that a lot with characters like 5 cost Smoker, where he gets double attack if you have a character that's 0 cost. Garp kind of combines them. We're gonna look at him later where he gets to KO a 0 cost character. There's just a lot of cards that do this. And getting into what Smoker's leader skill does, it's a really versatile effect. So when he has a Dawn under him, you could activate his main effect, which is once per turn, he's going to give one of your opponent's characters -1 to their cost. And then if there is a 0 cost character in play, he gets to gain plus 1000 power. So you can imagine this is really good into like decks that have like just hanging 1 costs or blockers, because you're going to lower that 1 cost to 0, and then you have a 7k swing for 1 Dawn, which is super efficient. And even if you can't get that 7k swing off with a 0 cost character in play, it's still very valuable to have the deck's main gimmick be available to you like every single turn pretty much. So you always can get this like -1 cost off, and it can definitely save you in like very niche scenarios. But with that being said, let's get to this deck's strengths and what really makes it shine in the meta. So of course, its biggest strength is that it undoubtedly has the best removal in the game, because KOing cards off of card effects is probably one of the best ways to remove threats in the game, if not the best, because you have basically, KOing on play or through some effects. You have bouncing, and then you have like resting and attacking into it. And KOing a card straight up is one of the most efficient ways to just get rid of a card, right? Because with bouncing, you're going to see that card again. And then with resting, you got to swing into it, so it's less efficient. And then even with that, like most decks have these big restrictions, like red can only KO things with like something like Jet Pistol if they're under some attack. And there are definitely different ways to manipulate that attack, but they come in different forms, like 2k counters that you don't want to play. Green doesn't have a lot of effective removal, like aside from like Straw Sword for like huge threats, like so it's like definitely harder to deal with. And then of course blue can only bounce up to like 7 costs. So if you have like a threat that's above 7 costs, blue just does not have a efficient way to remove it off the board other than swinging into it. But the strong thing about black is that because you could manipulate cost, you could KO anything in the game as long as it could be KO'd with card effects. Because you could always manipulate like a 10 cost card down to a 5 cost card, and then like pop it with like Sakazuki. That's what makes this deck so strong. And then on top of that, the black cards themselves, there's quite a few of them that actually just can't be KO'd by card effects in general. So you have cards like Borsalino, which is an amazing blocker, cannot be KO'd by card effects on your opponent's turn. And then you have the Smoker cards that can't be KO'd. So your board ends up being very sticky to the point where they just have to swing into these characters if they want to get rid of them. Or they can bounce them if they're playing like Ivankov, right? But most of the time, they're just going to have to swing into them, which can be very difficult, especially for like 5-cost Smoker, which is at 7k, and that's gonna be a very easy card to protect. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of strength is this deck actually has a pretty good matchup spread into the meta. It has really good matchups into green and red-green Law because of how many like KO effects it has. A lot of the green threats like 8-cost Kid are just like pretty obsolete because you could just lower its cost, KO it, and then they've kind of lost their like huge bomb of a board, right? And they have to fight you with like their lower cost cards that you could also just KO. And it gets so difficult for them to play after like the 10 drop Kuzan is on the board because, you know, they can't, like, swinging 10k is very difficult, and then like also they can't really establish a board because it's subtracting everything's cost by 5, which, you know, you're playing green, so a lot of it's like mid-rangey, and then so nothing's gonna really stick on the board. And what black can do is like not even attack you in the early game, just kind of deal with your board, starve you of your cards, and then win the game when they have like multiple huge threats on the board. The same thing goes kind of for red-green Law. Like, you could kind of just starve them of cards and KO everything on their board, make sure they have like 0 board presence, because with cards like Meteor Volcano being able to knock out a one cost, Monkey D Garp can knock out a 0 cost, but remember your leader skill can knock out a 1 cost, which is super important because you could remove those Namis when you usually can't with Law, right? Because they're just going to scoop them back up with the 5-cost Law. But then being able to remove their card draw and value and blockers, like, it's just so good, man. In terms of Kaido, like, it's really good because you have a bunch of cards that just can't be KO'd by card effect. So they're going to have to like lose out on value for their on-play effects. And it makes the 10-cost Kaido pretty much like unplayable because if they ever play it while you have cards that can't be KO'd on the field, they pretty much lose the game, especially if it's something like a 5-cost Smoker, right? And then like Borsalinos are still on board too. So even if they do play the 10 cost and swing at you 5k, Borsalino's not going to die and it's at 6k and you could just block. So it makes Kaido like really hard with these like non-KO cards. I think red can also be like a potential. I think red is honestly 50-50. They can like end up they can run you down, or they could also just like play it slow, attack with like one thing at a time, so that like you're less likely to block it. But I think it's good at keeping pace, at least in terms of on board threats, because you could KO something and then you'll have something on board so that if they go wide, you know, you could swing into it. It's not an unwinnable matchup by any means. But with all these strengths in mind, let's kind of bring it down, bring it back, and talk about some weaknesses. So I think the best way to describe black's weaknesses is in terms of their hand and hand size. They don't have any search cards. Like, there's no top 5 searcher yet. That's coming in OP3. So it's a little bit less consistent than a lot of the other decks that do have those searches available. Also, a lot of cards require you to discard a card to use them. Like Kobe and Sakazuki, they could KO things, but you have to discard a card in your hand to do it. So you're kind of trading your like hand size for board presence pretty much. And that could be very scary because, you know, hand size is pretty much everything in this game, to be honest. Like, board presence and hand size are the two most important things in this game. And like, if you're trashing cards to KO things, like, what about when you're getting swung at, right? It's going to be very difficult. Counters are going to be a lot more decisive in the games. So that's something that you have to look out for. And then on top of that, a lot of the cards don't really get you a lot of value when they're played, other than like the KO effects. They're kind of 1-for-1, and Kuzan is the only card that nets you a card when you play it, and he doesn't search. It's just draw 1 card. So it's, again, like very less consistent when you compare it to other decks. So because this is a completely new deck archetype and these are completely new cards, I just wanted to talk about what cards kind of make this deck function before we talk about the actual deck profile. Starting off with the early removal cards that you're gonna use to kind of stave off aggression so you could get to that 10 cost Aokiji. So starting off with Kobe, very simple. A 3-cost 4K. On play, you could trash a card from your hand, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. You're usually going to use these on like Okikus before they can attack. A lot of red-green law players are starting to play the structured deck Zoro, and that's an amazing target. But you could also potentially combo it with like your leader skill or Helmeppo, because Helmeppo could give like a character -3 to their cost on play to KO something bigger. But of course, you're gonna need more Dawn for that, right? And because you just have a ton of cost manipulation in this deck, he's actually going to be relevant pretty much throughout the entire game. And then another awesome card that I wanted to talk about for early removal is, of course, Monkey D. Garp. He's going to be a 2K counter in a lot of situations, I'd say. He might come up in green a little bit, but mainly he's there for your red and your red-green matchup because he's so good to play on 2, especially against Law. Because what Law wants to do is just play like a Nami or like a Jewelry Bonnie or something like that. But if they play a Nami, then they might end up losing it because his effect is when he has 2 Dawn under him, when attacking, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0. So what you can do is you could just leave him unrested on top. And if they don't have like a Vista or like a Robin to deal with him, he's actually really, really annoying to deal with because they're afraid to drop their 1-cost characters and lose their Namis, right? Because usually they never attack with Nami, so you'll never get the chance to KO it. So, but with this card, like, just it being on the board is already in danger. And it's so easy to get to that 0 cost for those cards because you could just neg the cost with Smoker and then get a 7k attack after that. So moving on to the kind of the late game removal, we have both Kuzans and Sakazuki. So Kuzan's really great for cost. On play, draw 1 card. But when attacking, you don't even have to put a Dawn under him. He's going to give -4 cost to a character during that turn, which makes it so easy to pop things. Like, for example, you could pop 7-cost Kid with a Kobe with this effect. You can lower... One of the most common combos is you could drop a Kuzan, -4 cost to a 8-drop Kid, and then Sakazuki it, right? Because it doesn't cost any Dawn to subtract that -4, and he nets you a card, so he's just an amazing card. Sakazuki, of course, he's just going to be an on-play effect. You can trash a card and then KO a 5-cost. He's pretty much Kobe with no counter power, and you could do it to 5-cost characters. And then, of course, we have pretty much the deck's main like boss character, 10-cost Kuzan. His effect is really important. So on your turn, all of your opponent's characters just get -5 cost. So he's just going to neg everything -5. And then on top of that, on play, you're going to KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0. So what this means is that when you play the turn you play him, you're knocking out a 5-cost instantly, right? A 5-cost or lower. And then on top of that, on your next oncoming turns, as long as he's on the board, pretty much all of your KO effects are going to be online, to the point where you kind of like, if you have 2 Kuzans on the field, you could you're KOing anything in the game, right? Because it's going to neg 5, make it 5-cost, and then you're going to drop another Kuzan, drop it down to 0, KO that. It's just so good. Like, the whole deck centers around it, and the deck gets a lot easier to pilot once this card is out. And it's so like, its game plan is so centered around this 10-drop that you actually want to go second in almost every matchup, especially the mirror, because it's kind of like reverse Kaido. Like, you know, you don't want to 10-drop Kaido first in the purple mirror. You want to 10-drop Kuzan first in the black mirror, because if you end up getting this 10-cost Kuzan out, and then they play their 10-cost Kuzan, if you have another one in hand, you could instantly KO their 10-cost and have 2 of them on the board. It's insane. So just make sure you're always going second, especially in the mirror match, so that you could just drop this card as soon as possible. And then real quick, let's go over some sticky characters that are going to be very difficult to take off of the board. We've got 3-cost Smoker. He cannot be KO'd by effects, and when attacking, if there's a character of 0 cost in play, he gains plus 2,000 during this battle. So he's really, really good if there's like a 0 cost in play, because he lets you be aggressive or control the board for very efficient numbers. And while on top of that, like he's just sticky, like you cannot KO him. So he's going to be really good into Kaido. And then also we have one of the best cards in this deck, honestly, Borsalino. He's a 4-cost 5k on your turn, but on your opponent's turn, he gains the effect of plus 1000 power, so he goes up to 6k, and he can't be KO'd by card effects. So he's a blocker that is going to stay on the board. Red cannot jet pistol it. They have to attack, and then it's going to be up to you whether you want to block it, right? And because he's at that 6k, he's actually going to be really annoying for red players and red-green players to deal with because they can't jet pistol him, and also they have to allocate more Dawn to kind of swing at your face efficiently, right? Because if they just swing at 5k like they usually do, it's going to get blocked by Borsalino, and then if they want to get rid of Borsalino, they have to again swing at it twice. So he's basically double blocked for a turn, or they can allocate more Dawn to swing like more at your face, which is pretty annoying for them to do. And then last but not least, we have Smoker. So he's 5-cost 7k, and he can't be KO'd by card effects. And on top of that, if he has a Dawn under him, he gains double attack if there's like a 0-cost character on your opponent's side of the field. And this is awesome because it lets you like kind of catch up in the game if you've been focusing on board and your opponent's been swinging at you. I found it's pretty good into red because they can't, they can't remove it. So they have to swing into it, which again is really annoying for red to do because it's at 7k, and they can't like Otama pistol it because again, can't be KO'd by card effects. So it helps you kind of catch up in the late game. And also this is going to be really annoying for Kaido to deal with because double attack is super scary for a Kaido player to deal with. And then also like they just can't KO it with like a 9-cost or a 10-cost, so it just sucks for them. So putting it all together, we have a deck that kind of looks like this. This deck won a flagship tournament, which is like a pretty big tournament for One Piece. They're usually like above 100 people. And you know, you have all of your KO effects, your manipulators. You also have events like Meteor Volcano, where its main effect is just KO something that costs 1. So there's like a lot of different ways that you can manipulate that to in your favor. You could also just use it to like pop searchers. You have Impact Wave, which is really good. You go up to plus 4k and you're going to KO something that costs 3 or less. So it's super good against aggro. Again, great against law because you could KO those things that they don't really want to get KO'd and that they would just scoop up. And it really makes your opponent think about like the order of their attacks. So that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. But as always, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want more content like this. The next one's going to be about Ivankov. And then also we're going to be dropping a case opening video on the 10th or like sometime after when we get our boxes. So that's going to be super exciting. We're going for that manga ace. Wish us luck. And as always, you know, good luck with work, school, whatever you're doing in life. And I'll see you guys on the next one.